Eric Keating, and welcome to the Product-Led Summit. I'm going to be talking about product-led growth metrics today. First, I'll tell you a little bit about myself, where I work, and then get into the meat of it. So, my name is Eric Keating. Like I said, I head up marketing at AppQs, and I've worked in SaaS for about 15 years, a little more, and worked extensively with customers in both B2B and B2C worlds. Now I'm heading up marketing at AppQs, where we're working closely with thousands of leading SaaS businesses around the world, from rapid growth startups all the way to the Fortune 500. And in my job every day, I'm thinking about how we can not only help our customers activate, engage, and retain more users, but also how we can do that more effectively at AppQs. So AppQs, it's a platform that helps SaaS businesses grow and scale. We empower marketing and product professionals to deliver beautiful and personalized product experiences without writing any code. We're most commonly known for making it easy to build onboarding experiences in your product. But while onboarding is huge in its role in retention, nurturing customers to adopt and really love your product doesn't stop after the first initial experience with it. It's all about minimizing user friction throughout their journey, and that's how you grow and retain user bases. And AppQs provides a holistic solution that makes that easy. But what I'm most proud of beyond our solution is that we have a really rich history of delivering high value, ungated educational content to the market. Totally committed to helping SaaS businesses grow, customer or not. So I encourage you to check out any of the resources navigable from appqs.com. And whether you want to learn about product-led growth with the Product-Led Growth Collective, become user onboarding certified with our User Onboarding Academy, or just get inspired by what some of the best in the business are doing at really good UX, we've got a resource for you. So please check it out. It's all free and super valuable stuff. So, like I said, today we're going to be talking about product-led growth metrics. And we're going to cover the most important product-led growth metrics and reference a couple of frameworks that help put them into context, which I think is something that's really lacking out there up until recently. So when we're talking about modern SaaS metrics, I'd be pretty crazy not to start with the Pyro metrics framework. So the Pyro metrics first developed and presented by Dave McClure back in 2007 as a framework for startup growth. And if you're unfamiliar with the metrics, you might be thinking, what's with the pirate reference? So the framework is acquisition, activation, retention, referral, revenue. Ultimately, R, like a pirate. So that's what it is. I'm going to assume we all know the basic meanings of acquisition, retention, and revenue. But activation may not be so clear. And the truth is, it's not as straightforward as some of the others. So before I dig in, actually, it's worth noting that you might know activation by other terms like aha moment or value realization. Essentially, a user activates when they first realize the value of your product, or they have their aha moment. It really clicks for them. They get it, right? And we'll dive into activation a bit more later in the deck. The other one is referral. So a bit more straightforward, but for clarity, this is about your users referring or inviting other users to use your product. In PLG terms, you may be used to hearing this one as it relates to the virality of your product or how well it motivates users to tell their friends and get them involved. My take on pyrometrics, just a little bit different. I think in the age of product-led growth, it makes a little sense to reorder them, right? So while I'm sure Dave didn't super consciously put revenue last, I think it's a little more helpful in this order. And plus, I think it's a nice lead into my next topic too. So, I moved revenue from the last R to the first R. So especially in businesses that have a free trial or freemium model, revenue is typically first recognized when a free user converts into a paying user, right? So if you think about it, you acquire them, you activate, get them to pay you, etc. And it also places referral last, which may not be true for every business, but I think it's a little bit more broadly applicable. So whereas a product like Slack would probably place referral as an early step in the process due to their business model, most SaaS businesses aren't like Slack, right? And so more often than not, referrals represented in the form of reviews and case studies and testimonials, general word of mouth, which more commonly occur when a user has not only started paying, but also has had some kind of success with the product, right? So with this slight tweak, we started thinking about how we need a more visual framework for metrics like these, and one that really leans into the product-led model, right? One that links metrics like these to the user experience, and it makes it clear that happy and successful users actually influence new user acquisition. And so this is exactly why we worked with hundreds of businesses from startups to the Fortune 500 to develop the product-led growth flywheel. Ultimately, it's a framework for thinking strategically about the life cycle of every user of your product and meeting and exceeding their expectations at each stage of their journey. And when you do it right, you're not only going to increase user satisfaction and retention, but you're also going to increase customer advocacy, which, as I talked about, can be a hugely effective source of new user acquisition. So I'm going to dive into the flywheel a little bit. Last year, I presented on the flywheel, focused more on the segments of customers and how you go about defining them. Today, I'm going to focus a lot more on the metrics and how they're aligned with the flywheel. So to start, quick take on evaluators. So, these folks are new or free users, no prior experience with your product. They're cautiously excited. They think your product might be able to solve their problems, but they're probably evaluating a variety of solutions, including all of your competitors. So the key here is to remember, like with few exceptions, each user entered your product looking to solve a specific problem. So exposing them to every nook and cranny is rarely the right strategy for how you bring people into your product and shape their initial experience. Instead, you really want to focus on driving them to the moment that's going to make them say, aha, right? Which is the aha moment or the moment of activation. So we'll talk about that a little bit. So have you heard of Facebook's 7 friends in 10 days rule? I find that when we're talking about some of these metrics, it's best to reference how another company has gone about defining theirs in order to really get the point across. So we're going to focus on that rule and how they got there. So in the early days of Facebook, the growth team there discovered that Facebook user who added 7 friends within their first 10 days in the app far more likely to stick around for the long term. So hitting 7 friends in 10 days became Facebook's activation moment. And so what they did with that is they designed their initial product experience to drive that exact behavior. When you're going about finding your own activation moment, I have a few steps that can be helpful. I'd encourage you to try and continue to iterate on. So, number one, start by looking for patterns in your users' behaviors. Right? So I recommend starting with the users in the ideal customer state, right? The users that you want to create more of. So these folks, they've usually used your product successfully over an extended period of time. They've got positive satisfaction scores. They've given your product a strong testimonial or review. You get the gist. In the flywheel model that I referenced, these are your champions. So look at what all of those users did when they first started using your product, right? If you spot a pattern, like adding 7 friends in the first 10 days, you're off to a great start. But it may not be incredibly obvious what that pattern is. So find the pattern that stands out the most to you and move on to the next step. So the next step, supplement your analysis with user feedback. Behavioral data is hugely amazing resource, right? But nothing compares to going straight to the source. So ask your best users why they initially checked out your product. What was their primary goal when they created an account? And when was the moment that they knew your product was for them? And if your best customers have been around for a while, they may not remember exactly, right? So you may not get the best data. And that's why you should also be asking your brand new users the same questions. Lastly, ask your churned users why they churned. So just as valuable as positive correlations is the data that tells you why people are churning, and they're just two sides of the same coin. So whenever possible, try to get on the phone. Nothing compares to two-way conversation, but you should at least introduce an exit survey. So when people request a churn or click churn, ask them why. Ask them some questions that will help you form a more confident hypothesis on what your activation moment should be. And with all of that qualitative and quantitative data, form that hypothesis about what your activation moment should be, and then design your experience to drive users to that moment. Don't give up quickly. Give it enough time to establish an adequate sample size of new users, and then reassess it And from there, you can repeat steps 1 to 3. Right? Many companies have a great deal of confidence in their activation moment, but most of them didn't get it right on the first try. I think activation is probably the most critical metric we're going to talk about today. So it is really important that you get this right. It can make a huge difference for your business, a huge positive impact on your business if you get this right. So don't half-ass it. Establish a hypothesis, test it. In an ideal world, it's perfect. If not, run through these steps again, try some different activation moments, see which one works best. So next we're going to talk about beginners and driving adoption. So, these folks have activated. They've hit the activation moment. They're eager to learn more. They're starting to explore your product's other features and functionality a bit more deeply. And so what you want to do here is help them build on foundational knowledge and discover, additional features and provide best practices for them. So, they're here to really just get shit done. So reduce all the friction, make it really easy to get guidance, point them in the right direction, shape your product experience to drive this adoption. And what adoption looks like, right? So similar process with activation, right? You're going to want to do a bit of research. This one can be a bit more data oriented. You're really just trying to establish some guidelines for what normal healthy usage of your product looks like. So, look at your users that kind of fit that mold generally, right? The people who have stuck around for a while, they're getting value out of your product. Maybe they haven't, shouted from the rooftops about how much they love it, but these are people who seem to be pretty normal users, getting value, feeling good about your product. How often are these people logging in? What features are they using, or what percentage of your product's features are they using? Does that depend on the user's function in a company or their role within their team? Ask these types of questions, and once you get some answers, establish some benchmarks, and you'll be able to categorize regular users using that criteria. So for example, good usage of your product could mean a user's logging in weekly, is using features X, Y, and Z. For Spotify, this would mean or could mean users who have created at least one of their own playlists, listen to Discover Weekly, and spend 2 hours daily playing music. Once you've established, or once your users have established a bit of a routine, right? They're logging in regularly, they're getting some value out of it, they're going to become regulars in this framework. And so just like a customer that walks into a coffee shop and doesn't even have to order, right? It's sitting on the table, that's what their experience should feel like. Um, at this point, your goal with these folks should be to really delight them and expand their usage even more, right? So expose them to new and premium features, and not just as a monetization opportunity for your company, but also as a way to deliver even more value to the user, right? And that's the way you should always be approaching this, user-centric, user-first. Also, you want to be asking these folks for feedback, and that's ultimately how you're going to be able to measure their adoration of your product. So, this is a bit simpler than the others. For my team here at AppQs, it's when a user gives us a 9 or a 10 NPS score, right? They're a net promoter. And what we know when they give us that score is they have quantified their love for us or their willingness to refer us to a friend. And that's what we use to measure their love for our company and ultimately move them into the final stage of the life cycle here, which are champions. And so champions, these are the users who, they love your product. They're highly likely to recommend your product to colleagues, friends, social media followers. And more importantly, they've formed like an emotional connection with your brand and your product. And at this point in the relationship, you are providing value outside of the job to be done, right? They're probably wearing your brand's t-shirt on a weekly basis. And so your goal at this stage is to get your champions to actually advocate for your product, right? Highly likely to anyway, but you can drive that, you can really bring it home. And so advocacy, it could take the form of referrals, whether that be introducing your product to other internal teams within the organization or referring your product to somebody in their network. But you don't need a formal referral program for that to happen. It all happens without us vendors even knowing about it all the time. After all, word of mouth is the absolute best marketing there is, or the death of your business if it's bad word of mouth, right? At AppQs, we start We start by asking for public reviews and ratings, right? Sites like G2 and Capterra, they're generating millions of visits each month from our prospects looking for some kind of third-party user validation, right? And so this is also your prime segment for securing case studies and testimonials. So this group of people, the idea here is driving that advocacy, making sure it's public. And once you've got it humming, I assure you, you're going to start to see your CAC come down, your cost of acquisition come down, and your new user volume scale. And so with that, I'm going to wrap up on the flywheel and move on to some other metrics that any product-led business should be thinking about. First, time to value. So, how long does it take for a new user to reach their activation moment? It's pretty straightforward. Your goal is to minimize the amount of time it takes to get to the activation moment. The faster you get somebody to that point where they're realizing the value, the higher likelihood they are going to be successful and stick around for the long term with your product. Everybody's got super short attention spans. If it takes hours to get there, hopefully your product is that great that it can sustain that. But ultimately, you want to get this down to minutes whenever possible. So you should be always thinking about how you can reduce this. I'm sure there are cases when minimizing time to value isn't the best option, but I've never heard of one. Next, we're going to talk about product qualified leads. So there are entire presentations dedicated to PQLs, so I'm not going to dwell on it. But the idea is that at some point, for some businesses, it makes sense to pass a user to the sales team. Could be to close the initial sale, or could be to capitalize on an expansion opportunity. And that's where, in really pure, exemplary product-led businesses, sales teams are often used to capture expansion opportunity. So PQLs usually defined by a combination of some user attributes and behaviors. For example, many businesses use the activation moment as a trigger to send a PQL to their sales team. So a free user activates, they're ready for a sales conversation. If a free trial or freemium user who has XYZ attributes, let's say works at an enterprise SaaS organization and hits the activation moment, create a lead, send it to the sales team. From there, sales team will get in touch with that highly qualified user and ideally coach them toward a premium relationship where they're paying you. Speaking of expansion, so expansion revenue is hugely important to any healthy SaaS business. So while we're all experience some degree of churn, the best businesses are growing because their existing customers are investing more dollars. Expansion revenue, net new revenue from existing customers after the initial sale, right? So you've got somebody that comes in, at a base level tier, and ultimately, in order to get the value that they really want to, they've realized the value of the intro tier. They want to increase that value or get new and additional features. This is an expansion opportunity. There's potential for them to upgrade into that tier, and that's what we'd categorize it as expansion revenue. Next, net revenue churn. So, like I said, expansion revenue, it's the anti-churn, right? So net revenue churn is calculated as total revenue lost to churn minus total new expansion revenue over revenue at the beginning of the period. So for example, I think this math works. Your company has $1,000 in revenue at the beginning of the period, hopefully more than that. For example, $1,000 in revenue, you lose 100 to churn, but you make 200 in expansion revenue. So the net there is $100 from your existing customer base. And with the expansion revenue, in that case, neutralizing the revenue that you churned. So your net revenue churn will be negative 10%. This is what you'd call net negative retention. And if you can build a business that has a net negative retention, I promise you it is going to be a successful business and very attractive to future investors if you are taking the VC path. This is, I'd say, one of the most important metrics, not just for product-led businesses, but for any SaaS business, any business really at all, but certainly one that's incredibly important for product-led as well. Last one, not the least one, virality. So there's actually a formula and a metric for this, right? So basically you establish an average number of new users that an existing user can expect to bring on board and convert into a customer. So like I said a couple of times here, virality whether it is actually inviting a new user to participate in the product, or somehow word of mouth driving new user acquisition. Incredibly important part of a product-led business where you've got low touch, you're trying to minimize your marketing spend. This one is definitely one to keep an eye on. If you can build some kind of virality into your business, into your product experience itself, you're going to be in really good shape. So that being said, I'm going to close on one final slide. I've said it a number of times in this presentation, so I want to end on some data from our friends at HubSpot that they sourced, regarding the sources of information that prospects prioritize as they're making purchasing decisions. Right. So far and away, top two sources here: word of mouth and customer references. So while all of these metrics are super important to be tracking and optimizing against, if you're not providing an exceptional user experience, it's all going to be for naught. So whenever you're designing an optimization plan, please be very mindful that most of these metrics are measuring moments in time from the customer experience. The reason why we developed the product-led growth flywheel is to put them in the context of the user experience. So thinking about metrics in a silo, looking at the experience solely in a quantitative through a quantitative lens, it's dangerous because because the user experience and the way that users feel about using your product, how frictionless and delightful it all is. Now sure, optimizing against these metrics could and probably should ultimately create a better user experience, but you've got to think holistically about the whole thing. And again, that's why we developed that flywheel, so that you can actually put it into context and never forget how important it is to be mindful of your user's journey and how they perceive it, right? So, like I said, optimize to your heart's content, right? But always, always, always be sure to deliver joy, value, and results to your users. And with that, I'm going to wrap up. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed the talk. It's a lot to squeeze into 15, 20 minutes. So if you'd like any more information, please feel free to reach out to me, eric@appcues.com. I'm happy to get back to you. There's also, like I said, a ton of resources on appcues.com and across the web, right? Lots of great thought leaders on topics like these, including a ton of the other presenters that are part of this conference. So thanks again. Hope you enjoyed it. See you next time.